Okay, so it is the top of the hour and we will kick things off. Welcome to the Boss Up Conference. Now, in this session, I hope that you've been enjoying it so far. In this session, we'll be discussing how to keep a good management team in place in the business that you are acquiring. This is important because I think the last thing that you want to do is acquire a business and have everyone jump ship after you have signed on the dotted line. So, this is what we'll be addressing in today's session. Um, I am Rochelle Clarke, a succession and business transition advisor with close to 2 decades of consulting experience, about half a decade at the helm of my own advisory firm, Succession Strength. At Succession Strength, we work with individuals and companies preparing for or going through an exit via succession or sale. So that's just a little bit about me. Before we get things started. Now, in today's session, or today's session is going to be divided into 3 themes. The themes are: one, evaluating team capability and commitment. The other is team alignment and cohesion. And then third is managing the outgoing owner. Now, just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. There is a resources link that is in the chat box and it's pinned at the top of the chat box. This includes access to basically everything that I'll be speaking about today. So feel free to access it by just clicking on the link. This is an open and interactive session, although I can't hear you. So please feel free to use the chat box, enter all of your questions so that we can get to them at the end of the session, because we will be having some discussions towards the end of the session. So feel free to submit your questions there. Let us jump right in. Evaluating team capability and commitment. Now, at the end of the day, the one thing that will hold your team together is their level of commitment. Their commitment to their role, their commitment to the company, and their commitment to you as a prospective buyer or as a new buyer, a new owner, I would say. Now, we'll get to the outgoing owner and the role that they play in this whole scenario, but there are other factors that have an impact on the commitment of the team and ultimately on your ability to retain them throughout the course of the transition and afterwards. Hi, Stefan from Germany. Now, I'll share with you throughout the session, I will share with you the tools that we use and how we approach this area in practice. I'm sure that many of you are already doing some of these things, but perhaps you get a little bit of inspiration based on what we are also doing, areas that we also look at. Now, you're thinking of buying a business, or you've perhaps bought a business already. The one area that's not going to be neglected by any means is examining the transition readiness of that business. Is that business saleable? You're going to look at how attractive it is, whether it can continue to perform after the company is purchased. Basically, it's transferability. Those are areas that you are definitely going to look at. Is this business ready for sale? Right? And this is one question that you are definitely going to be interrogating all on your own. Now, within our practice, this is also an area that we assess businesses on. And I think that it comes as no surprise that some of these factors are factors that everyone will be looking at when they're looking to purchase a business. The operational factors, financial factors, the industry dynamics. On the transferability side, you're looking at strategy, the objectives, legal issues, compliance issues, management, employees, the systems, contracts, resilience. All of these things you're going to be checking the box on, right? These are part of your checklist, no doubt. But equally, we examine the personal dynamics of the owner and the team. And we call this the personal transition readiness, right, of this business or of this company that you are looking to acquire. Now, the goal here is to evaluate their capability and their commitment, because these are equally as important for the long-term success of the business post-transition. We examine their personal preparation as well as their well-being. And by personal preparation, this ultimately speaks to whether or not they have the right skills and capabilities to competently move to the next phase. For someone who's already in the business and looking to ascend in the business, and this is perhaps a successor, we look at their personal preparation, but it leans heavily on the side of their capabilities, as you can imagine. In the case of senior leadership or someone who's getting ready to retire from the business, we look at the level of preparation that they have put into making that next step out of the business. So it's the same type of evaluation, but we kind of look at things just a little bit differently based on the stage that that person is in. And then we look at personal well-being. Now, this is important. And as we go through the discussion, particularly when we get into looking at the owner and evaluating the owner, personal well-being is the one area that I have found, or that we have found in practice. This is the one area that is often overlooked, right? And this is where you can think about it as having the mindset, right? So if you're looking to purchase a company and you're evaluating the outgoing owner on their personal well-being, what you're looking for is a mindset that is able to let go of the company when that time comes. When you're talking about a next gen leader and you're speaking personal well-being, however, what you're looking for is their mindset when it comes to assuming this new role. So, have they had the right conversations with the relevant people in their lives? For example, just the other day, there was an example of a gentleman who received a fantastic job offer from a company in the US. He was based in Europe. He had this fantastic offer in the US. Now, throughout his career, he traveled around Europe, or he was transferred around Europe quite frequently, and his wife and the family moved with him. But for this change, he assumed that it would be status quo, that the family would move with him, without having conversations like this. Um, uh, right, without having the relevant conversations with obviously the wife and the family and his close loved ones. Needless to say, he ended up having to turn down that role because his wife and his close family were not on board. So when we speak about personal well-being, it truly is about the person's mindset and their ability to make that move into the next area of their lives. Because if this is an area that they have neglected, what we have found is that it makes the transition so much more difficult, right? And we'll be speaking about the owner shortly. So overall, you've signed on the dotted line. It ultimately becomes about fostering an environment where everything comes together. You're looking at the business, but you're also looking at the persons within the business, right? This is the holistic evaluation that we tend to do when we're looking at business transitions and preparing businesses to transition. I'm sure that many of you are doing this in some way, but I'm just laying out how we do it in practice and what we have seen work. The biggest stumbling block, as I mentioned, tends to come on the right side. So numbers 3 and 4 tend to be more neglected when it comes to evaluating businesses for a transition via sale. Right, folks are going to look at the business's attractiveness. They're going to look at its transferability. In many cases, they don't really delve very deeply into personal preparation or personal well-being. Right, and this is what can kind of throw the wrench into the works at the end of the day. Another example, particularly when you're coming to a situation of a sale and selling the business, we have seen in many cases where the owner is the one who ends up being the hurdle and that stumbling block to selling the business because of their hesitation. They're not completely on board, and that's because mentally there are a number of barriers, and we'll speak to that towards the end of the presentation. But I'm just letting you know that for us, these are equally as important as evaluating the bones of the business, as they say. Okay, now you've signed on the dotted line, and it all becomes about fostering team alignment and cohesion. Now, it goes without saying, but it definitely needs to be said, that communication is key. Now, this is a huge change for the company, regardless of its size. It's a huge change for any company to absorb. So you want to err on the side of over communicating. One question that I will always ask you as a buyer is, what is your change management strategy? And some may say, oh, listen, I'm just buying a small business, change management strategy. That surely is something that they use in big corporations. But I don't need something like that for the size of business that I'm looking at. What we would say is, whatever you want to call it, keep in mind that this is going to be a massive change for the business that you are looking to acquire, even if it's a small business, particularly if it's a small business, when a lot of the relationships tend to be closer. So you need to have a plan in place or a strategy in place for managing this change and managing this transition before, during, and after the sale. A big part of that transition, and it's called change management, so I don't think we can really step away from the name, even though it may give some people, they say, oh, that's big business, big business talk. No, it's business talk, it's strategic talk. Ensure that you have a change management strategy in place. It really also speaks to communication, how you're going to be communicating this change, what's coming up, what to expect. Now, right. So this is part two. One of the first things that we do anytime there's an impactful leadership change is to do a values realignment exercise. Now, I've included a link to the checklist of some of the questions that we ask, and that's in the resources section. But let's have a chat about this. This is important. This is really important because what we have found is that sometimes it's the leader or it's the owner who really sets the tone for what the values of the business are, consciously or unconsciously, right? And in many cases, actually, we have a quiz. We have yep, time for a question. I want to hear from you. Question for you. Whose values drive the decisions that you make at work? Whose values? And you can put it in the chat, enter your responses in the chat. Are you driven by your own values, the company's values, or the customer's values? So when you're at work, whose values drive the decisions that you're making? Own values, company's values. Golden thread that aligns all three. Mm-hmm. Corey, typically my values that I impose on others, company or leadership. Mm-hmm. I'll give another few seconds for those who are thinking and or typing. And it's okay to have the response in your head, obviously. Right. So the answer is actually A, and I don't have time to go into the research that's done behind this. Yes, all three, and they should be in alignment. But the baseline, if you think about your baseline reaction, it would be your own values that tend to drive the decisions that you make at work, right? If in the absence of all else, your own values are what would be the driving factor here. Now, question to you is, could you imagine if your company didn't have or didn't communicate and continuously reinforce its values? There would be absolute chaos because you'd have many Corys who are trying to impose their own values on others, and it would be absolute chaos. So every time there's a leadership change, it's usually an opportunity to do a realignment. What are our values as a company, as a business, right? What's our vision? What's our mission? What are our values? And this is critical when it comes to a senior leadership change. All right. So this is why this is among the first things that we do. Another thing is, listen, we can't get away from the fact that reformulating the values is a good bonding exercise. It helps the current employees and the incoming management to really sit at the table and work arm in arm in terms of defining what the business will look like and what the business would be driven, the values that the business will be driven by going forward. Right. So the employees really feel a sense of ownership and belonging because it kind of gives them a voice when it comes to defining some of the important things in the business. Right. So this is something for you to consider, but it's definitely an area that as soon as there's a new management team, we tend to have a realignment relatively quickly. And it's whether or not the outgoing owner is a part of those discussions, it really comes down to a few things, but we'll get to that in section 3, the final section. Now, another reason that we do a values realignment is because we cannot escape the fact that we all work, or for the most part, we work in multi-generational environments where our values and approach to life are fundamentally different. And this is something that we truly can't escape from. This was I like to share this slide even with clients because it tends to be an aha moment for many. You know, looking generationally, things were coming along quite nicely. There were the traditionalists, there were the baby boomers, and they were more or less aligned when it came to their attitudes around work, around retirement. You know, there was the company man as the traditionalist. Um, and well, in today's parlance, it would also be the company woman. And then, of course, you had the baby boomers. Now, they had to take things up a notch, and they invented the 60-hour work week, right? So there was definitely this commitment to the job, commitment to work. But as you can see, this is definitely fractured. There's been a fracture in between the generations. For Gen X, and I've highlighted some of the areas where things are just not business as usual. And this is around core values, where we have baby boomers who are really about success, right? And then we have Gen X who are more about time, right? Their time is important to them in terms of work attitudes. You know, Gen X is saying, hey, I want some work-life balance. In terms of their attitudes or their views on retirement, baby boomers, it was, hey, you know, if I retire, who am I? So it's an identity thing. And then, of course, you have Gen X who are coming in and saying, hey, by the way, I may retire early. So what this means is that it's not business as usual. So despite the fact that, you know, maybe we all go to the same place for work, show up perhaps in the same uniforms, ultimately underlying the values could be completely different. And we're not even going to start down the road of cultures and the intermix of cultures, right? So hopefully this brings to life the fact that there truly are fundamental differences that a realignment usually helps to bring to the fore and create some sort of cohesion within the business going forward. Yes, I like this one. Now, when it comes to a transition, many may be thinking or saying, well, you know, what are the roadblocks that I need to look out for as I buy this business, or as I'm thinking about buying this business, or I've just bought this business? What are some of the roadblocks? Now, these are the 5 topics that tend to create difficult transitions, right? And I say these are the 5 topics because they tend to be conversational topics that need an element of heavy communication and conversation around, right? Now, many times these questions are not going to be voiced out loud, but they may be whispered around the proverbial water cooler, right? But keep them in mind and try to ensure that they're addressed in some way to avoid any buildup of resentment or dissatisfaction that may come from people making assumptions. Now, one of the first questions that we have is control. So, how are decisions going to be made? And I think that's a natural question. Anytime that there's new ownership that's come in, well, how are decisions going to be made? Particularly if you have a case where the outgoing owner is still present in some way, right? Who's going to be, how are the decisions going to be made? The other is about careers. Who can hold leadership roles or specific roles and how? Then there's capital. So, how is the financial capital invested? There's commitment. So, how do we encourage employees to contribute to the company's success? And then we have connection. So, how do we sustain cohesion as the firm or the company grows? Now, as you can imagine, there tends to be a difference between where these questions are generated. So, topics 1 and 2, you tend to find with the younger generation within the company that you're acquiring. So, they're looking at, well, who's the person who's making the calls around here? And then, of course, careers, because many of them are quite ambitious and they're looking at, hey, well, what's the next step for me? And you know, how do things work out in my favor? Not saying that members of the older generation don't have these top of mind, but they tend to be more with the younger generation. In terms of capital allocation, of course, it's something that weighs heavily on the shoulders of the actual owner. But here's where you start to move into senior leadership territory, right? So they want to know, okay, well, you know, is this going to affect my budget, right? I know many, you know, within the audience here, we're looking at smaller businesses. But even within a smaller business, you may have 1 or 2 employees who wear multiple hats. So keep this in mind. Right. So, you know, our budget's going to get cut. You know, will I have enough money for X, Y, or Z? And then we speak about commitment. So, how do you encourage employees to continue to contribute to the firm's success? And then connection. Numbers 4 and 5, you tend to be questions that, as I mentioned, senior members who have been within the company for quite some time, or members of the older generation. These are the questions that they tend to have top of mind. Um, Maybe again, maybe not voiced out loud, but these are things that they definitely tend to want to have answers to. So even as you're considering acquiring a business, keep in mind that your change management strategy needs to include an element of communication. And when you're thinking about what am I going to be communicating, this tends to be a good place to start, right? Because these tend to be the hurdles that tend to affect or have an impact, or yeah, have an impact on whether or not the transition is smooth. So keep these in mind is what I would say. Question for you. What is the most common challenge for successors preparing for a transition? So you're acquiring a business and you have members of the younger generation, right? They're not the senior leadership, they're the members of the younger generation. And they're preparing to go through this transition. What's the most common challenge that you think they would have that's kind of top of mind for them? What keeps them up at night? Maybe not up at night, but what's on their mind? Is it the terms of any new roles, or are they concerned that the terms of employment may change? Are they concerned about timing? When things are going to happen, or are they concerned about talent or their capabilities? What do you think? Let me know in the chat, please. In terms of the new role, okay. Feels like all of them. Yes, but there's always one that sticks out. And we do this based on a lot of the baseline work or benchmarking work that we have done across the globe. Terms. Who else? What other brave soul will venture a response to this question? Give it another few seconds as you ponder and type. Talent terms. Yeah. I can see how many of you, perhaps with the mindset of terms of sale of the business and all of that, can be thinking terms. The answer is actually timing. Many of them want certainty, right? Particularly in this world where there's a whole lot of uncertainty, many of them actually want certainty, right? It's knowing when things are going to happen so that they can organize their lives. Remember, a couple of slides back, we spoke about the next generation really valuing their time and the work-life balance. So many of them, top of mind, are thinking, hey, when will this transition happen? What changes are going to be coming down the pipe? What are those changes going to look like? And hey, I'm an ambitious person. When am I going to be promoted? Right? So while all three of these areas are quite important, what we have found is that in many cases, it's the timing and that degree or quest for certainty. This is the one that tends to stick out more than the others. Many of them seem to be comfortable that for the most part, the terms of their role will remain the same. Many of them, if they're ambitious, they already have an idea of where they're falling short in terms of their capabilities. So they kind of have those areas taken care of. The area that they have the uncertainty around tends to be around timing. Now, this moves on to our final section, managing the outgoing owner. Now, this is an area to be mindful of because there can be a lot of mines along the way, and not in a good way, not gold mines, land mines, and that's not a good thing. And this truly is because of the impact that an outgoing leader could have on the business, even after you've signed on the dotted line. And this impact can be positive or it can be negative, right? So you really want to ensure that you're managing the outgoing owner in such a way that it's beneficial to you, to the company, and to everyone involved. Now, I see that many folks now, I know that we have folks joining from Germany, so I'm not sure whether or not you would be familiar with Judge Judy, but for those of you who know Judge Judy, this famous judge and TV personality, I want you to look at this quote because I thought it was classic. right? When asked about retirement, this was her response. And if you know Judge Judy, it was sharp. And that picture that we have up there is exactly how her face would probably be looking. She says, I don't play golf. I don't play tennis. I don't play mahjong. Why would I want to look for something I want to do when I already know what I like to do? And this was what she said at 78, right? She's now 80 and 80 or 81. And it's no surprise that she started a new show called Judy Justice after the famous Judge Judy series ended, right? This was her comment. Hey, I already know what I like to do. Why would I look for something else to do when I quote unquote retire? Do you think that this is the mindset of someone who is ready for retirement? If we go back to the wheel that I showed you at the beginning, looking at that well-being section, I don't think that she would score very highly in that section as to being mentally ready to make this change. So, moving right along, another question for you. Within 12 months of their retirement, what percentage of baby boomers regretted leaving their company? Is it 0%, 25%, 50, 75, or 100? What do you think? Business is the best game in town. Right. Exactly right. 75, 75, 25, 75, 25. What do you think? Within 12 months, this is 1 year of retiring. How many regretted leaving their company? I'll give you the answer. Take you out of any misery that you may be having. The answer is actually 75. 75% regretted leaving their company within 12 months of retiring. And this is for baby boomers. But you're seeing, in many cases, the case of the boomerang retirement. I'm not talking Tom Brady, right? You're seeing the case of the boomerang retirement, where given the option, you have many situations where former leaders are coming back to their firms, right? Coming back to the organization. And in many cases, what we have found is that the reason for this is because of a lack of preparation. Yes, I know that, in many cases, it may be a financial situation, et cetera, and so forth. But if you really boil things down to the lowest degree, we're speaking lack of preparation, right? Because there are contingency plans that can be baked in terms of saving, et cetera. And Bob Iger, yeah, absolutely. Disney World, absolutely. Right? So it truly comes down to a lack of preparation and not having something that is exciting and purposeful to move on to. One big indicator for us around this is wording, word choice. Particularly when you're speaking about retirement. And when I say retirement, we've been talking baby boomers, but I think that we are all aware of the fact that retirees don't need to be of baby boomer age. They can come at any age, right? Even younger owners as well, right? So just keep that in mind. When we speak about readiness to retire and preparedness to retire, we're speaking about everyone, right? Who's getting ready to leave that business, because you do need to have a plan. And slight tangent, for us, it's really important. Word choice, as I mentioned, is really important. And we usually ask this question, I will retire. And the question, the next word, it's a choice between from or to. I will retire from, or I will retire to. And depending on the way that the person answers that question, that, yeah, of course, it's not scientific, but it helps us to understand where their mindset is when it comes to moving on from their current role. Because here's the thing, if you're saying that you're retiring from, that's backward looking, right? Which means that your affinity is to what you have just let go of. If you're retiring to, that's forward looking, right? So you're really looking, and usually it's with anticipation, right? That you're moving to something else. So, a little bit of something that we use here internally. By no means is it scientific, and it does not get away from the fact that we still do the assessment. But for us, that's usually a curious way to start the conversation, right? Are you retiring from something, or are you retiring to something, right? Okay. And by the numbers, and these are some of the statistics, by the numbers, we know that in many cases, it comes down to not being prepared, right? Lack of preparation, right? And I won't go through all of the numbers. I'm sure that many of you are very familiar with it. The main one is at the bottom where about 50% have no plan at all, right? Some of them have an actual written plan, but many of them are completely clueless, which may not be so good if depending on the path that you choose once you have acquired this business. Now, in most cases, when folks speak about retirement preparation, they focus on wealth and health. And usually in that order, wealth first and then health. So, will I have enough money and will I be healthy enough to enjoy it? But there are other areas to consider, right? Their finances, their expectations, internal perceptions or their identity, external perceptions, relationships. And this is what we go through. As I mentioned, the left side of that circle that I shared earlier, this is what we interrogate to ensure that there is a plan in place um, for that person who is getting ready to take that step. And we perform this assessment on key employees who are going to be remaining in the business to understand their capability as well as their commitment. Right? As I mentioned, all of the assessments are linked in the chat, so you can go and have a look. Um, yeah, so this is where it's important because we do assess the employees who will be staying as well as those who are getting ready to leave. When we assess outgoing leaders, however, the objective in many cases is to help them plan their transition out of the business. In doing this, we tend to focus on two primary areas. One, life restructuring, and the other is identity bridging. And I'll give you two stories. Now, when it comes to life restructuring, there was a situation where there was this high flying executive who was getting ready to retire. And we were having a conversation. So I said, hey, Richard, congrats on the retirement. It's been you've had a great run. What are you getting ready to do? What are you going to be doing afterwards? And he said, well, Rochelle, I'll go home and, I'll take up gardening with the wife. I like gardening. It's something that she does well. So yeah, that's what I'll do. I'll be gardening. Okay, fun. Enjoy yourself, Richard. Let's kind of see how things go. I look forward to hearing from you in a couple of months. He spoke in a couple of months. I said, Richard, how's the gardening going? He looked at me almost with a blank stare on his face, with a little bit of fear is not the word, but regret. And he said, yeah, Rochelle, I've taken up a role as an advisor. So I'll actually be going into office most days of the week instead. You see, what had happened is that the journeys of him and his wife collided. All of the time that he was at work or at the office, she was at home tending her garden, living her life, following along on her journey. After he retired, obviously they didn't have a conversation about the realignment of roles and how things would change or the impact of this change. So his family was not prepared to absorb the impact of this change. So very, very quickly, I think that he was looking to be the CEO of the home garden, and that did not work out quite well. So his wife won in this case, and yes, he ended up, of course, still enjoying his life, but in a different way. And he is no longer working in the garden, right? CEO of the home garden, right? So I say this to say when we speak about life restructuring, it truly is about how is this person going to be spending their time, right? And they don't need to be retirement age sitting down playing bingo. No, we're not speaking about that at all, right? This can be a leader who has a passion outside of work, outside of the office that they really want to get involved in, right? Or perhaps they were in a work environment where they were truly away from the family for quite some time. So maybe they want to spend some time being at home and really building those bonds with their family, right? So the first thing that we do is life restructuring. The other one is identity bridging. And I'll tell another story about this. This is a story of the golf course because when you speak retirement, particularly of people of a certain age, you tend to speak playing golf. What are you going to do? Play golf. Okay, fine. Following along that on that trend, on a golf course, there was a group of golfers who were, out there hitting, and this third, it wasn't the third, like something like the fifth golfer walks up by himself. They look at him and, he's going up and he's introducing himself. And they look at him and said, okay, so welcome. Let's say his name was John. Welcome, John. Who were you when you used to be somebody? Who were you when you used to be somebody? And I'll pause. Who were you when you used to be somebody? And that tends to be the mindset in some cases of folks who are going into retirement. If I'm not this, if I'm not the role that I have been playing, who am I? Right? So it does engender a bit of an identity crisis for some, which is why it's really important. So the point here is that not having a plan actually makes it harder for the owner to let go. So let's speak about owners in transition, because this can have a drastic effect on you if you're looking to acquire a company. What do you do with an owner in transition, knowing that the impact that they could have, can have an influence on others, including the employees that you're hoping to retain in the business? What do you do with that person? And for us, we advise on two ways. John says this hits very close to home in a few acquisitions. Lots of emotions and ups and downs. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So when we look at exiting, there are two ways that this can be done. How do you manage an outgoing owner? We call this the one-step or the two-step exit. In the one-step exit, the owner leaves, and perhaps there's no earnout, perhaps there's no transition period. It's, sign on the dotted line, owner's here one day, gone tomorrow. If you think about the story of a Navy captain, from what I understand, a Navy captain, once he leaves his ship, he never goes back onto that ship, right? And that is to ensure that his successor has the full ability and full capability to have ownership and agency over that next role. So for you, it's truly about deciding what role you see the outgoing owner playing. Is it that you need to do a one-step exit where it's kind of a clean break so that you can kind of exert your own influence? Or would you be considering a two-step exit, which, perhaps it's a little bit more self-explanatory. And this is a situation that involves a transition period, right? Before the outgoing owner actually leaves the building for good, right? But parameters need to be defined so that it is evident to staff and stakeholders that the decision-making has transitioned, and that the owner is truly there in a support role context as opposed to being a decision maker. I cannot say how many times within a transition period it ended up being so confusing, because just having the presence of that outgoing owner, just having that person's presence can influence things in a way that perhaps may not be in your favor, right? Even though, he's trying to push the successor to the fore, folks may still be deferring to him or her for, questions or decisions. So you really need to ensure that this is managed in such a way that it empowers those who will be left behind once that owner eventually leaves. The other thing that I would caution here is to tread lightly, right? Because if the owner had many loyalists among the staff, they'll be watching how you treat that owner when it comes to their exit. And they'll be using that as a proxy or a predictor for how you will be treating them, right? So despite your great intentions, despite your good intentions, ensure that you're managing that process and managing that outgoing owner well, because, there's one thing that I would always say to my team when it comes to, disagreements. In many cases, you're not usually judged on the merits of the point that you're trying to make, right? Someone from the outside is probably not going to be judging based on the merits, right, of what's being discussed. In many cases, they will be making their decision based on how much they like or how close they are to one of the parties within that disagreement, right? So, it's about interpersonal dynamics and really managing those interpersonal dynamics, because yes, you want to ensure that if the management team is strong and you're really looking to keep them within the company, you want to ensure that, little things like this don't cause conflict unnecessarily, right? So I know we're coming up to the 45-minute mark, and I do want to leave some time for questions or discussion. So what in my opinion, 90% of time, step one, exit is the best. Yeah. And ownership, and yeah, 10% is a necessary evil, only to keep exactly keep. Thank you for that take, Jordan. Indeed, in many cases, if it's a new owner in town, many prefer to just have a clean break and move on. But for reasons like relationship management, perhaps the owner needs to stay on to it as in an advisory role, perhaps to mentor the younger generation, but carve out a role for that owner in such a way that it doesn't step on the toes of those who will be remaining with the business. Right. So this is one thing to keep in mind. So as we're working with clients, we help to decide whether or not a one step would be best or a two-step exit for that owner. So to wrap things up and to come to a conclusion here, some points that I would like to leave you with. One, transitions go beyond the numbers, right? You can, kick the wheels on the business to ensure that it has good bones. But in many cases, what can, cause a deal to fall apart may be beyond the numbers. And many of you, have given examples of a situation where it's the owner who ended up backing out in the last minute or right? It goes beyond numbers. The other is evaluate team capability and commitment. And this evaluation starts even before you sign on the dotted line. You could be evaluating capability and commitment as you're doing your due diligence. So find a way to do that. The other is that owners need to prepare holistically for exit. And this is the mindset that I was speaking about. And then finally, outgoing owners may play a key role in the transition, but it is up to you as the buyer to define what that role looks like or how that role looks. And in a way that does not impede the progress that you're trying to make or negatively influence those employees who you're looking to retain. And that's it for me. Let me know what questions you have. I'm more than happy to respond. Uh-huh. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, Jordan, and I'll just share a couple of stories here because folks seem to like stories. When it comes to emotions and ups and downs, yes. When it comes to acquisitions, it's the emotions that can kind of tip the scale in a negative way, right? As I mentioned, you have situations where it's the owner who ends up backing out in the last minute, even though the deal on paper looks good, and that's because this element of fear may come in. And in many cases, we have seen the fear come from nothing to do with the actual terms of the deal, right? Because it's a really good deal. But a lot of that comes from other things that they're dealing with, right? And their lack of preparation to move to that next role. So it's the fear of the unknown. It's that personal fear of the unknown. What am I going to do after? If I let this business go, how will I be spending my time? Who will I be after I leave this business? Right, so they're dealing with a lot mentally, and in many cases they end up just kind of, as they say, pumping the brakes and taking a step back and saying, hey, actually, yeah, I may not be ready for this. Tips of best practices to help set expectations or guide emotions for sellers when you think they need to be a part of a two-step exit. Yeah. Okay. Right. So in some cases, sometimes in having an external party, right, like an advisor, break this news, so it's not buyer versus seller. In some cases, if you're going through a broker, for example, it's you news like this, right, that can be potentially explosive. Having a third party advise on that way forward may be a better way to go than just coming out and telling the seller, hey, by the way, I want to do a one-step exit versus a two. But this is something that you should have an open discussion around, because perhaps you may have a situation where the owner, him or herself, just wants to sail off into the sunset, right? So if that's the case, then that's good. But if that's not the case and you think that it can be potentially contentious, having a third party have a conversation like that may be best, right? Um, if the new owners need to right size things like benefits and pay as part of transition, how is this best handled with employees? Are there different strategies for different demographics? Yeah, it truly depends on the business and the business that you're working with, where where you are located. Because I'm assuming, Andrew, that you have already looked at the legalities of kind of changing benefits and compensation packages, etc. But what I would do is ensure that this is, communicated. In some cases, it may be joint, right? A joint communication between the new owner and the outgoing owner. But it's truly about keeping the open lines of communication between management and employees so that they know what's happening. For example, you can preempt the employees by saying, the rationale or the reason for this takeover, particularly if it's a distressing situation. Maybe the conversation could go along the lines of, hey, in order to preserve the business for the future, we will be making some investments that may require us all to, that may have an impact on all of us. We will be communicating to you what those impacts will be, right? And come up with this change management plan, as I mentioned. The last thing that you want to do, Andrew, is in this case, spring a change up on current employees. That will not go over very well. So something like right sizing and making massive impactful changes when you come in, particularly as an owner, it's usually good to preempt those changes by kind of dropping hints along the way. And it's not something that's typically done solo as a new owner. In many cases, you may need help coaching that decision or communicating that decision to existing employees. And the way that we recommend doing this is either starting off by having joint communications with the outgoing owner, and then also relying on managers, depending on the size of the business that you're looking to acquire, relying on managers to help, massage that message in that, hey, there will be changes. Yes, we will discuss what those changes are looking like, but it's in order to achieve X, Y, or Z. Right. So always ensure that you have a reason or a rationale that they can buy into for making those changes. Because sometimes looking at that helps the message go across a little bit easier. Okay, are there different strategies for different demographics? Yeah, it truly depends on on the business's culture and where you are located. Yeah, some may prefer complete open transparency, but if this is not the nature of the business, then it's not recommended, right? So use the communication channels that work within that business, right? So in order for you to get to this stage, in order for you to have these conversations, you need to know the business that you are acquiring and what works for them, right? And bake your change management strategy into that. The last thing that you want to do is come in and kind of say, hey, I'm here. Here are changes. No. Um, uh, Amir, how do you manage the situation when an assistant manager has a lot of the owner's responsibility before you? Yes. So here you have a situation where an existing manager has absorbed a lot of the owner's responsibilities, right? So there's been some element of a transfer of responsibility to an existing employee. Amir, what I would say is that employee, unless the knowledge is truly disseminated throughout the organization, that employee now becomes a key employee, right? Which means that you need to do your best. If you like that employee and you want that employee to stay on, you need to do your best to ensure that they are on team and on side when it comes to what you will be doing, or your plans for the business going forward, the business's strategy going forward. So what you don't want to do is alienate that employee, particularly since you know that a lot of the knowledge base of the company lies with them, right? But try to include them and involve them in the development of the strategy for this new business. Yes, you may have your own ideas, but find a way to have them feel as though they also have a seat at the table. Right? Is what I would say in this case. I know that these are smaller businesses, which means that it's unavoidable in many cases, but having the knowledge concentration, any sorts of concentration, in one person, is usually not a very good thing, right? It's usually a risk for the business. It's usually a risk for the company. Of course, there's the hit by a bus scenario, but you also want to avoid a situation where that one employee has the power to hold a business at ransom, right? That's not usually a position that you want to be in. So in order to work around that, it's always good to ensure that things are documented, multiple people are trained if needed, if necessary, but your contingency plans in case of X, Y, or Z. Oh, yeah. Tangent. One thing that we do is we always encourage every single one of our clients to have a business continuity plan in place. And this is also an area that we focus on. But even if we're speaking long term, even if we're speaking selling, preparing a business for sale or preparing a business for succession, the very, very, very first thing that we do, table stakes for us, is do you have a business continuity plan, particularly if it's a smaller business? And the rationale behind this is, hey, all of our long term plans go to nothing if something were to happen to a key employee or member of staff, right? So having those contingency plans, having those workarounds are really, really important, particularly if it's a situation where you cannot avoid having that concentration, that knowledge concentration. Um, yeah. Yeah. So what I would say is try to diversify so that you're not necessarily relying on that one person for everything. What other questions do we have? Yeah, I know the other session starts in a few minutes. So what I would say is, of course, there are the resources, and Nundio, I think that those are going to, I don't know if those go away when we leave the session or if they will stay. But what I would say is have a look around, and if there's something that piques your interest, feel free. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out, drop me a line. I'm more than happy to have a conversation. And yeah, I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. I think that we have a lot of good content coming through. So hopefully this is all helpful to you all. You're most welcome. Absolutely. Sure, Paul. 3 pillars for due diligence success. Yeah. Okay, so that gives everyone a few minutes to kind of stretch the legs and grab some coffee before we join Nate on the 3 pillars of due diligence success. Aha. Yeah, that's a really good question. And to be quite honest, Roxanne, this is a conversation that's really, really heating up now. Insurance advisors to cover risk within the insurance industry, and I think the irony is that I'm actually going to be speaking about this in a few weeks. Insurance companies are feeling the pain right now when it comes to managing stakeholders, managing policyholders around the topic of risk management. Because what we have found is that traditionally, the insurance companies have been shouldering the burden of managing disruptions. But that's not how insurance is designed to be used. So what the insurance companies are saying now is, hey, we need to put some of this responsibility back on the shoulders of policyholders. So how do we ensure that they are doing what is necessary to help manage their own risk? And this is why they're looking at ensuring that they're educating policyholders around prevention, right? How do we prevent the impact of many of these disruptions on the policyholder's business? And business continuity planning is one of those areas that they're focusing on as a preventative measure, because what we have found is that 90% of businesses experience greater resilience, less disruptions, faster bounce back from a disruption when they have a plan in place, right? So we have a lot of insurance companies who are saying, hey, we need a more balanced approach to risk management than we have had in the past. How do we work together to ensure that, A, we reduce the reliance on insurance? Because I think in both scenarios, both for the policyholder and the insurance company, no one wants to be in a position where they actually have to use insurance. For the policyholder, premiums go up and it's just not a good situation. So a lot of the insurance carriers or firms are shifting their focus to preventative measures. not only in a business setting, many of them are also investing in companies that, for example, health insurance companies. It's about subsidizing some of the policyholders' premiums if the policyholder signs up for X, Y, or Z exercise app, et cetera, and so forth. So you're going to be seeing a shift in that direction because the pressure is too heavy on the shoulders of insurers. So how often do we work with insurance advisors to cover risk? Now, a lot. We do have the standalone product that creates business continuity plans for smaller businesses, and there's a lot of interest in that at the moment because I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, but the frequency and severity of disruptions has just seemed to increase tremendously. And yes, insurance companies cannot handle it. What type of retention or incentive plans have you seen implemented, Amir? Sorry, Roxanne. So I hope that answers your question. If you want to delve deeper, we can have an offline because yeah, this is one area that's definitely heating up. Amir, what type of retention or incentive plans have you seen implemented? Oh, now these run many, and I'll share, but it truly comes down to the type of business and the resources that they have available. You know, in many cases, depending on as I mentioned, what's available, resources. In some cases, there may be equity on offer if some key employees stay on for X, Y, or Z after the transition. So equity can be an offer. A bonus can be on offer, as in just cash. Um, what else? What else have I seen? Yeah, in some cases, it's more flexibility in terms of how employees work, so they may have more perks that can be offered. But yeah, it's a tough question to answer, Amir, not knowing the size of the business and what resources they have available. But in many cases, if it truly is a key employee that the buyer cannot do without, then you may see some equity come on the table or a bonus, a substantial bonus for having that employee stay on. But of course, there are parameters, right? It's not just show up at the office for the next 2 or 3 years and get a payout. It's show up at the office and hit X, Y, or Z KPIs, and then we'll have a situation where that's on offer. In some cases, there may be a promotion as well. So it in many cases it comes down to the individual. If you're looking to retain one or two key individuals, then in some cases you have more to play with in terms of ensuring that they stay on. But if you have specific cases that you wanted to discuss, Amir, reach out and we can have a conversation. Yeah, you're welcome. Absolutely, Paul. What is your related question? Is the sales made the 24 fully qualified buyer? I suspect there wouldn't be many deals. What are the best way to find a mentor who has industry experience? Yeah. It depends on the this is such a tricky one. And I hate to answer it in this way, Paul, but it truly depends. It depends on the industry that you're talking about. It depends on the type of sale that you're looking to execute, the size deal that you're looking to execute. I think that there are resources, and perhaps Nunzio can weigh in on the resources and the mentors, etc. But there is a way to get guidance on this, but it truly depends on a number of factors. Um, yes, in some cases it can be a former owner or someone who has gone through the process within the industry, and it's perhaps keeping the seller in the deal. So there's a earn out situation. Yes, yes. If you have a seller who you think would be open enough to provide you that guidance and provide you that mentorship that you need throughout the experience. Right? Yeah. So to answer your question, you want a seller at the table, and of course there's equity in an earnout situation. You want that person at the table if they can add value to you going forward. If you think that it would be if they won't be adding value, then it's not a situation where you necessarily want them to be sticking around for too long. Ah, wonderful. Ah, wonderful, Roxanne. Yes. So Paul, Roxanne is saying that there is a website specifically around free mentorship. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed, Paul. But the thing is, even with an earn-out situation, there must be parameters because that person needs to be moving towards having the business not rely on them. Right? So even if it's an earn-out situation, you want it to be a case where there is an end to the relationship and you are moving towards that end. Right, it's right, and they go away. Right, so only have them at the table if they need to be and ensure that you are working towards the exit door. Yes. You are most welcome. Now guys, I know that we are over time and Nate's session should have started, so what I will do is I will close out and hopefully everyone joins me in Nate's session that has just started. Right? But thank you so much for your time. I hope that this has been valuable. Feel free to check out the resources or give me a shout if you have any questions. You're most welcome.